And now I'm getting myself coming back to me, so I'm getting a bit of an echo. Oh no, it's gone again now. If you have any questions, please get in touch. Message us on facebook.com/Leeds Dads, or on Twitter. We're live on Twitter, Periscope, @Leeds Dads, and we'll do our best to answer. Just hoping that we have sound, because we've had a few problems with sound coming back.
Can you hear yourself?
So that might actually be the audio getting through. How does that sound to you? Andrew, can you hear me?
There's a bubble.
Can you hear me on Facebook now? Is audio getting through? Hello, Andrew. Hello, Andrew.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. They're saying it's back on with Facebook.
So it's what? There's no audio on Facebook, or there is audio?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know what you mean. Is there audio or is there not?
Yes. There is audio.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so we're fine. Should we go ahead? Let's go ahead.
Yep.
Okay. So our focus tonight is on child behaviour. Are you happy with your child's behaviour under coronavirus? With me tonight is occupational therapist Ceri Lloyd, who's looking at children's reactions. Sarah's a specialist occupational therapist and play therapist who's worked in child and adolescent mental health for the last 30 years. I hope you've got at least a mug for that.
I know, you'd think, wouldn't you?
You'd think. Ceri McCann is a psychiatrist who's taking questions on how parents are reacting. Ceri's a cognitive behavioural therapist at Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service. Is that known as IAPT as well, Ceri?
Yeah, there's a recent change. It used to be just IAPT and a few other services under Leeds Mental Wellbeing.
Right. And Ron Batiste, a member of Leeds Dads who has experience in the care and legal fields. Hi, Ron. I think Ron's frozen. Okay, lots of issues tonight. So if you have any questions, please get in touch. Message us on facebook.com/Leeds Dads or @Leeds Dads on Twitter, and we'll do our best to answer. Psychiatrist Ceri McCann, tell us a bit about what you've seen in Leeds over the last 3 or 4 weeks in terms of the mental health of people around the city.
Of course, there's such a lot of change going on with coronavirus and having such a damaging impact in many different ways to a lot of people's lives. There's very, very rare few people who haven't been affected minimally by this. So understandably, you know, with the lack of restrictions and things, a bit more demotivation and a lot more worrying, really understandably.
And should we be surprised about how people are behaving at the moment?
No, I think this is a pandemic, and, you know, even when the restrictions are lifted and things, it's going to be the start of quite a change to mental health and how people are managing, because it's such a shock, isn't it? And it's something that we're all not used to.
So what are people feeling? What are they telling you, or are the people who you're seeing, or your colleagues who you're talking to? What is the feeling of people in the city at the moment?
A lot more uncertainty, really understandably, because there's so much uncertainty in so many ways and lack of control. There's so much about this virus that, you know, we all want to do as much as we can, and the sad reality is there's so much out of our hands at the moment. But it's so nice as well to just hear the little ways that people are coping and really making a difference to their community as well, and having something to focus on, like helping out their local food bank. It is really inspiring what I've heard. Some really inspiring stories as well.
Leeds Dads runs a free food parcel service, and we take them out around the city, and we're constantly overwhelmed by the number of people who are ready to support us. They're ready to help in any way they can. I do wonder if they want to just get out of the house with a lot of people, because it's difficult being cooped up. Does this compare to any other environment, any other experience?
I think it's been a very long time since anyone has had any experience like this. And one thing that's really interesting, which I've noticed, it really puts into perspective what it's like to have some real chronic long-term health conditions which really restrict what people can do, or even thinking about people from different countries who are, you know, victims of war and, you know, political issues going on. It really does put into perspective, you know, how blessed we are in society, day to day, week to week.
What do these feelings, how do they manifest in physical and mental terms?
Yes, I think, again, the most common things that people are experiencing very much are feelings of depression, which are characterized by kind of hopeless thoughts, just low mood, not really feeling like wanting to do much, and lack of motivation to get started with things they may have planned that day, and therefore just experiencing a lack of energy, fatigue. And again, this does then crisscross very closely over with long-term mental health conditions and can have an impact on how we're feeling with other long-term conditions, things like diabetes, just making that harder to adhere to kind of things like diet that we're supposed to be doing and physical activity. And just worrying a lot more as well, and feeling things like muscle tension a lot more from like constantly worrying about a threat that there's not much that we can physically do about in that moment. Very, very difficult.
So you think people are going to be sort of flexed, thinking that they're going to be fighting, or they're worried about something happening, and they're constantly tense? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is the whole thing about anxiety. It's from an evolutionary source of trying to respond to a threat, which is usually, you know, the kind of fight or flight response. And the reasons why our muscles are activating is because we're getting ready to kind of deal with that response, and having, you know, such lack of restrictions and not being able to move and, you know, escape as much. It's really, really hard to try and actually alleviate that tension. Definitely.
Do you think that expands? Do you think there's more of that than in terms of people feeling sort of like restrained, or is it about sort of like people noticing that they're feeling restrained? How can I rephrase that? Is it because people are because life is so slow, you've got time to recognize your feelings?
It could vary person to person. Sometimes if we're just used to kind of worrying and there's not much that we're doing about it, again, we can just get lost in those worries. We can end up ruminating, which is just going over the same thing again and again, and not really kind of any achieving new reflections or taking any action because of that thinking. And it's a very demoralizing process. So people could not be even aware that much of what's happening, and then next thing we know, we're just feeling very tired from that as well. Or we could be very hyper aware and therefore just feeling very scared about doing lots of different things. And it could be, you know, simple things around the home, or simple things like going for walks outside the home.
Welcome to Leeds Dad's Ask a Dad Coronavirus Facebook Live. I'm Erroll Murray, and from Leeds Dads, we're focusing tonight on children's behaviour. Are you happy with your child's behaviour under coronavirus? Are they angry and outspoken, or are they sullen and quiet? We have the occupational therapist, Ceri Lloyd, who's looking at children's reactions at the moment. Sarah is a specialist occupational therapist and play therapist who's worked in child and adolescent mental health for the last 30 years. CAMS, is that how we should phrase it?
I think that is the current lingo.
Okay. We've had so many messages come through, and so many parents concerned about their children's behaviour. Well, how is the current situation impacting in general on children and families?
It's impacting massively, isn't it? I think it's an incredibly stressful time. It's a really stressful time for parents, and it's a really stressful time for children. For children, all of the kind of the normal bits of their life and routine have gone out of the window. And For some children, that just means that everybody's home all day. For other children, their parents are frontline workers, and so they're, enormously worried about their parents and what's happening. And the level of stress, and for some children, really quite terrified, is there, and that's normal. That is the response you would expect to see, and that we would expect all of that tension and stress to show in a child's behaviour. And really, to be some extent, we would be a little bit worried if it didn't, and that it's completely normal for children to regress, to go back to an earlier stage of functioning, or to do much more externalising, what we think of as more traditionally naughty behaviour, or to go much more inside themselves and be worrying and ruminating and thinking about all of those things. And I guess what I hope we can do tonight is to think about ways to help parents to support their children, really, and be able to think about their behaviour as communication, and how we can front load some resources and strategies to help children feel safer and more secure, to settle them. But I think I'm a big believer in the kind of what I think of as the aeroplane principle, which is, when you're in an aeroplane and they're doing the safety announcement, and they always say, parents, attach your oxygen mask first and then attend to your children. And that's such a hugely important thing here, that the way we as parents respond will have a massive influence on how our children respond. And so really taking care of ourselves as parents and being aware of our responses, and sometimes having to kind of moderate those responses around our children, will have just such a big impact. And we can think of that in very everyday things. You know what it's like if you're somewhere and something alarming happens, your children will immediately look to you, their significant adult, to see how you're responding before they work out how they can respond. And everything is so much heightened at the moment, but it is just like that. We also
you talk about terrified. You said children are terrified.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen lots of children worried and disturbed. It's a pretty extreme situation that you're describing.
Well, I think for children whose parents are frontline healthcare workers and who have seen the news, who hear about people dying, it is a terrifying prospect that their parent is going into that situation. And we're trying to set up helplines and facilities and support for children of those parents. But I think that is the reality, that they're very, very worried that something's going to happen to their mum or their dad and have no control. It is terrifying.
So what can we actually understand from our children's behaviour? What is it that they're telling us?
I think they're telling us that it's a pretty tricky old time, that in a way, if we think of behaviour as the end point, and that what's really helpful is to try and tune into and understand your children and create channels of communication that allow you to really get a sense of where they are before they're having to escalate it up. I think about, loads of us are trying to work from home at the moment, and there are the demands of working from home, but there are also your children's demands in that. And if you're on a Skype call or doing something and your child's done a picture that they were desperate for you to see, it doesn't take long for their thinking to go from, oh, I love this picture, mum or dad are going to really like this, to then thinking, oh, they're really not interested in my picture. Oh, they like those people on the screen more. I know they don't even like those people on the screen because they're always moaning about work. Oh, well, they must really hate me if they like those people on the screen more than they hate me. And, and it just goes and it goes so quickly, really, doesn't it? That we've got to all the time be trying to think, what might it feel like to be the child at this stage? We understand in our adult way.
So they're turning the behaviour of the adults in on themselves. Anything that's changed in the adult's behaviour, they're saying, it must be my fault, or it's because they're not interested in me. Is this something you recognise, Ceri?
Definitely, it's having an impact on the family as a unit, and this is a big adjustment, and it's still adjustment for kids as well, arguably harder, because again, it's such a different situation than they've ever had to experience before. So I think that emphasis on praise and love is going to be so important for everyone in the family right now.
Sarah, it's difficult to manage challenging behaviour at the best of times. So how can we address challenging behaviour in these new environments, in these restrained environments?
I think two things in response to that I could talk about. If we think about challenging behaviour, we think of a pyramid of behaviour. If we think of challenging behaviour as the top triangle of that pyramid, that often by the time you get to that top triangle, what we need to try and do is to try and sort things out earlier on in the life of that behaviour. So that's one thing that I'd quite like to talk about. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is, in a way, that these are not normal times. And
Sure.
So we can't expect ourselves to do everything and for everything to be normal. And I think it's so important for parents to think about, okay, what can I let go of? What would normally be our expectations and our rules? And actually, do we have to review those and change those at this time? Because none of us are going to be doing our best ever parenting under this sort of stress. So we have to understand that, be a bit kind to ourselves. But I think we have to think about, how do we build capacity in our children, in ourselves as parents, before it gets to that point of things being thrown or what we'd think of as really bad behaviour?
I'm Erroll Murray, and from Leeds Dads, and you're watching Ask a Dad Facebook Live. Our focus tonight is on child behaviour. Are you happy with your child's behaviour under coronavirus? Are they angry and outspoken? How can you help them? With me tonight is Occupational Therapist Sarah Lloyd and Psychiatrist Ceri McCann, Cognitive Behavioural Therapist at Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service. And I'm going to go straight to some of the messages because they're totting up. Can you see any of them there, Ron? No, I think Ron's frozen. Oh, he's either frozen or he's sleeping with his eyes open. Ron, have you seen them, or have you lost us? We've lost audio there, I think. Kieran says, I have a 4-year-old and she's been okay, but now is getting very bored. I feel uncomfortable taking her out to the supermarkets with me. And we've been on little walks, but with the weather... I can't... Oh, I think we've lost Ron there. I feel uncomfortable taking her out to the supermarkets with me, and we've been on little walks, but with the weather about to change, any suggestions with what else we can do? She was used to 3 full days a week at nursery to now being stuck indoors. We've watched films, baked, played games, crafts. What else can I do? I'm out of ideas. I'm sure that's in most homes and with older children as well.
Absolutely. And I think that you realise how much schools pack into a day, don't you, when you're trying to fill that school day. One thing I would say is don't be put off by the rain in terms of still going out for a walk, because actually going outside, just put on your pack-a-mat, put on your wellies, splashing in puddles, still go out in the rain, because being outside, going out in that fresh air gives so much release and relief, I think, for children.
Sure.
Running around, having the chance to be active and energetic. Children are like little dynamos of energy. They need to be able to burn off energy. And then I think you're right. We all need to find more resources for ways of occupying children. And there's some great, I've got a big list of resources. There's loads of really good websites. There's loads of people putting stuff up for different ages of children. And I've sent those to you, Erroll, so maybe we can find a way of putting them up. So depending on what children are interested in, then there's loads of things. If children like animals, there's Paint and Zoo has got loads of activity things for kids to do. There's creative activities, there's stories, there's all sorts of things that are out there for you to try and occupy children with. But I'm sure that must be a common theme among families. Actually, oh my goodness, it's only 10 o'clock in the morning and I've used up all my good ideas already.
And Ceri, do you recognise that desperation, that anxiety parents feel?
Yeah, and I think it can be really, again, this is an example of a situation where naturally we'd have that worry and it'd feel very, very overwhelming. And it is going to come down to a lot of problem solving with kids and with families at the moment. Again, with even shaking things up, we could even create things like a competition or a reward system for just doing basic activities around day by day and thinking about what little rewards could look like spending time with daddy or just having an extra long bath or something. Just anything that would make things different, or even giving, you know, something we've done in my family this week, someone deciding what we do each evening as well. And then again, someone having that responsibility and excitement to decide that day of the week.
I'm not watching Frozen 2 again. I've had enough of it. It's the worst second film ever. It really doesn't work. But yes, I guess you're also talking about empowering the children, saying this you can control what's happening. Is that right, Sarah?
I think it's hard, isn't it? Because I think kids have lost so much control. We've all lost loads of control at the moment. And I think when we're feeling a little bit powerless, nobody really works to their best. But for children, I think that's compounded even more because they haven't got the benefit of our cognitive capacity, so they can't understand it in the same way that we can understand it. But I completely agree with you, Ceri. I think finding things that kids can have a wee bit of control of during the day, during the week. And I also think that sometimes for some children, trying to make things as predictable as you can just help to shore up their sense of well-being. So knowing what you're going to be eating, when you're going to be eating it, what happens in a day, what you're going to do, and breaking up the day, having lots of short bursts of activity and then breaks, but that it doesn't all have to be all singing, all dancing all of the time. You know, it's okay to be bored sometimes. It's okay not to be making, you know, some phenomenal Lego creation.
I'm very glad that you feel that it's okay to be bored sometimes, because I've got a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, and when they're bored, it just stops everything. It's like you're pouring glue into the whole building, and we can't get anything done. So empowering them to be active is really important for a lot of parents. Do you see that?
Absolutely, but there's also something about creativity that comes from boredom too, isn't there? You know, if everything is, if you're constantly structured and stimulated, there's not much time for original thought. And I think that the crux of what you're saying there is that actually you're wanting to be able to be doing something, so you're wanting the children to be occupied at that point. And I think that's different, isn't it? I think absolutely, if you're needing to get on and do something, then you are needing your children to do something. But setting tasks that feel fun is good as well. I don't know, we had a task, not during this lockdown, but at another point with some kids, of trying to find the best. Our aim over 5 weeks was to find the 10 best children's jokes that were out there. So every day looking at 10 jokes on the internet, 10 children's jokes on the internet, and as a family working out, okay, which is our one favourite one? So that would go into the final 10, and doing that for 10 days. And then with those last 10 jokes, extending it out to family and friends and saying, come on, let's find Leeds' funniest joke. Let's do this, let's do that. And having little projects where children can take a bit of control and responsibility, but that are fun, are really, really good to do those sorts of things. Taskmaster, I don't know if people are watching those Taskmaster videos and trying to do some of the Taskmaster stuff at home. That's really good fun, making dens, doing things, all of that sort of stuff can be fun and can be good as well. I think for me, sometimes I think, actually, has everyone had a bit of a laugh today? Have we had that? I love that when you could hear your children laugh. And even if that's only been 1 or 2 bits today, then maybe having some of those as that's what I'm aiming for today, rather than all of the masses of stuff and the expectations that we put on ourselves.
We've had a message from Jay who says, I have anxiety and can't leave my garden, which means I can't take my children out too. Will this affect them when all this is over? Will they struggle to adjust to leaving the house? If I come to you first, Ceri, we're hearing from someone who doesn't feel able to leave their garden.
Yeah, and it sounds so difficult, and just really puts into perspective, you know, the real threats out there, and, you know, the things that we're seeing on the news is so difficult, and it doesn't sound so surprising that you're going through that. It's really, really difficult. And what we know is that obviously modeling, children pick up things from parents, and it's self-reflecting yourself and feeling, considering, would it even be worth trying, a 5-minute walk just up and down the street? And again, just preparing those risks together as a team, problem solving anything, like just making sure that we know the plan, and even just trying that 5 minutes, because even 5 minutes, whether it's 2.5 minutes there and back, is still 5 minutes of activity rather than nothing, which is still an achievement.
That would be a start. That would be a leap for her, it sounds. Sarah, will this affect...
Can I come back on that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, I think it's back to that idea of the children will manage as well as you. So make it fun being in the garden. I don't think it matters not leaving the garden if actually staying in the garden and having fun in the garden can keep it light, can keep it bright, can make it an interesting thing for the children. The children were going out of the garden before coronavirus. They'll go out of the garden again after coronavirus. But, I think how lucky to have a garden actually, and to be able to be getting out into your garden, and don't beat yourself up about it. Just think of some fun games to play in the garden, have some ideas. I'm loving all these hopscotches that seem to be on the pavements everywhere. Make some hopscotch competitions. Children can do gymnastic-y things. They can you can make all sorts of adventures in a garden. So definitely don't beat yourself up about that.
Sarah, I think I'm going to call you up every day, every morning from now on, and just get a list of ideas, because I run out of them myself. So
honestly, my kids are so sick of them. Like, oh, Mum, will you just let us?
Oh no, these are
like,
great.
No, come on.
They all sound good. They all sound good. Ron, are you able to see any of the questions coming in?
I've had lots of problems, can't see anything really, and I've missed a lot of what's been said. I only get bits and pieces, not much.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can disconnect and reconnect you now. So I'll have a word, see if we can get Andrew, our tech, to disconnect and pull you back in again. Lizzie has said, due to homeschooling, there's been a lot more screen time, which is causing more tantrums when they're told to come off their devices. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Should we allow children to have as much screen time as they like right now? Ceri?
It's one of those creative aspects which can be a good distraction, and we know there's some really positive creative apps out there. And then when we think about well-being overall, we do want to have some sort of boundary with screen time, because it can really impact things like sleep, because it sends a message to the brain that we need to be awake if it's near bedtime with the white light and things like that. And then therefore those sleep hormones don't come through as much. So
is that real? Is that true?
Yeah, I know there's something that people can do with their devices with changing the light settings to blue light as opposed to white. But just general sleep hygiene, just screens being near bedtime is generally quite damaging for our ability to sleep generally.
Any tips on screens, Sarah?
I think screens are such a mixed blessing, aren't they? They're so handy at times, but you're right. It's not the time the children are on the screens that's tricky. It's that time of coming off the screens that's hard. And I think it has to be so carefully managed. I don't think there are any magic answers, but I think in a way, it being predictable before they start about how long they're going to be on it for is a good idea. So you're not suddenly coming in when they're in the middle of the most exciting game and saying, right, now it's time to finish, but that they know that they've got however long it is, and that you work out with them. So that'll mean you'll be able to do this, and this, and then it'll finish. And sometimes, a bit of front loading beforehand and saying, so just let's swap roles. So if you're the mum and I'm the child and I'm saying, I don't want to come off my screen, I don't want to do this, what would you be, what could you say? What would help me to come off? What would, and doing that front loading, helping them to think through what might be going to be the things that are going to be helpful for them. There's something funny that happens when kids are on screen in a way, because their brain is so active when they're on screen, but their body is completely passive, that you get this funny mismatch between brain and body. So I think when children have been on screens for a long time, it's helpful to do something quite physical So maybe a bit of screen time that finishes with, is it Joe Wicks that does all that very physical workout in the morning? You know, record that and have that after the screen time or something, so that then their body gets a chance to have some outlet that their little brains have been whizzing away with.
I think
really individual.
we'd have to do the Joe Wicks before.
Well, it'll do us no harm.
Otherwise, afterwards, they're not going to feel keen to do anything. Yasmin says, I'd like to ask advice on maintaining bedtimes for teenagers, and also about the importance of exercise for this age group.
Yep, I think I'm really strong on this. I think trying to help teenagers maintain a normal sleep, a day-night balance is so important. Trying to be in bed at the very least by midnight, at the very latest, and up by 10. I think there's such a danger of kids reversing their sleep pattern at this point, which is just no good for anybody's mental health. So for me, that's more important in a way than the exercise bit. I don't know what you would think, Ceri, but I'm just going to have to go and get my plug.
Okay.
Of course. No, I completely agree. I think in terms of just, you know, sleep being something which is so commonly impacted as well by coronavirus, from us all just worrying so much, it can be useful for everyone in the house just to have a similar routine, just like what Sarah was saying. Something which is really important for sleep hygiene is just having a really consistent wind down routine, ideally not involving screens. Again, it's something to be curious with because it all impacts us in different ways. And just the same with the morning, trying to regulate that and have a really consistent morning routine. And, you know, things like even a hot shower can help kind of increase the body temperature and get us feeling more alert. Just trying to almost be curious and try different things to self-soothe on the night time with that hour and a half before bed, with just really signaling to the body, now is time to relax, now is time to sleep. Different things will work for different people.
This is also lining into the environment of relationships, because as teenagers they're going to be much more independent, and they live in their parents' home, but they may be saying, you know, I want to stay up, you can't stop me from staying up. The relationship balance in these environments, as we're living now, is probably changing dramatically. How do you balance that?
It's a very challenging issue because, again, we want people to be heard and we want to be acknowledging in the family if people have had that sudden shock in change in kind of independence and routine. We want to really validate that. And I guess it's thinking about what is the impact on other people in the house by the change in that bedtime. Is there any compromise? And again, still with teenagers, it's so important to have boundaries and be really firm with that. Again, we don't want to give in and almost slip with the boundaries. So it's, again, it'll be different with every relationship and is such a challenge, but so important to keep speaking to each other, and so important, again, just letting each other know that we want the best for each other as well. So important during this time.
We've got a really extreme situation. A lady has come on, the woman said, my 7-year-old child was sent to a behaviour school to help support him for 6 months. He completed it in October and has done amazing since. He's never struggled with his behaviour at home, he just struggled in a school setting. I'm worried that this may set him back. Any advice? I guess this is more for you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think that sounds really difficult. I mean, I guess I'm so happy to hear how well he did in that environment. What a fantastic thing. And I guess some of what I would be thinking about would be trying to analyze, why did that work? What helped? And to be thinking, actually, we're probably going to have some sort of transition for a child who's had such extreme difficulties from kind of lockdown to being back in school. And I find myself wondering what the transition was that happened between the specialist unit and the mainstream school, and whether it might be possible to engage the skills of the people in the specialist unit again to help you think about that transition back to school. But I think it sounds so positive and encouraging that you've done it once, that, you know, kind of use all of those skills and things that you did that time, but also seek some help, get some help. You know, if the wee one's only 7, there are teams around who can be helping. I think of people like the Senate team, the team from the child's school, the team from the host school. You know, I'd be wanting to get all those heads together and be saying, what can we do for my wee one? This is a really different sort of situation and absolutely needs support, and you need support around you, but so well done for having done it once.
Andy and Brendan have put in very similar points. My son is 18 months old, was 18 months old before lockdown, and we used to go to Mum and Tot's coffee mornings. Then at weekends he came to basketball games and sledge hockey games. He'd run around and there'd be lots of people to look after him. I'm worried how he will be after all this. He has not been out of the house for 6 weeks. Will he be clingy, or will it not affect him because he's very young? And Brendan says, I have an outgoing 2-year-old who has never been clingy, always confident and independent. 2 months of only having close contact with us, we're worried it will turn her into a more clingy kid, and she's maybe showing some signs of it already, but it could be a change at a stage of development. The concern is, by staying in, how will it be when once restrictions are lifted?
Yeah, and I think that it's important to think about. And the first person, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but you're absolutely right. Children will be affected by this, however small they are, and it would be really foolish of us to think, oh, they're too little, they won't notice, because they absolutely will. But what both of you describe is children who were previously confident and outgoing, and for them to be like that, they must have gone through that lovely earlier stage of using you as their stable base, as their kind of secure point that they went away from. They did a bit of exploring, they came back to you, you gave them enough reassurance for them to know, actually, those people are going to be good, it's going to be fun, and they gradually got further and further away from you. And because that's not a very natural process, it is a very natural process, you don't kind of notice all of those steps. So I think what's probably going to happen after lockdown is it's going to be like that for all children, and for adults too, I think, a bit, and that we might just have to get a little bit used to going back to being a child's secure base again, and doing it a little bit more consciously, and encouraging children to remember what fun it is to play with their friends, but also being there and being available for them if they do need to do a bit more checking in to begin with, when they go out again. But I'm not thinking long-term damage, because we had healthy, robust children before, and we'll have healthy, robust children after.
Okay.
I also know other families are doing some beautifully creative things of staying connected by seeing people online and doing things and joining up and having little play sessions. Even just them noticing their little friends playing somewhere else keeps the idea in their head that those friends are still there, they're still playing, they're still alive, they're still well. So I would really encourage you to do those sorts of things as well, some virtual groups.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. We're talking about looking at the time after the restrictions are released. And we just heard from Andy and Brendan about their concerns for their child. But what about concerns for adults, Ceri? We keep hearing people saying, "Oh, it's going to be the party of the century when people are released, when people start have their liberty back." But for some people, I don't know if they're going to feel that way.
Yeah, it's a big adjustment, because we've all adjusted to lockdown, and it's not all negative, this bubble. There are some really positive things about it as well. And I know people who are natural worriers may feel protected in some ways, not having to think about the kind of really vibrant things about having lots to do and going lots of places. And it's one of those things, because a lot of us have not been through a similar experience like this before. It's a worry where we think about it, we have to kind of reflect, is there anything that we can really do about this worry in the moment? And if it's kind of in the future, again, we can make plans and things like that, and think about maybe building up activities gradually, or maybe even prioritizing what we'd want to do first in terms of getting back to routine. But sometimes when we're worrying about the future, it comes down to the very fact that there's not much that we can do about it right now in the present. And sometimes we have to try and refocus on other things to try and decrease that anxiety.
So you're saying don't think about it, don't worry about it, because we can't change it and we can't affect it. So don't concern ourselves about it.
Yeah, it's coming back to another very difficult, very real factor, that it's another thing that we don't have control over. It will be a big adjustment, and we can't predict how we're all going to respond, but I'm sure there will be some difficulties for everyone in different ways. And right now, that's a really common problem for children and adults. There's so many thoughts going around that we can't really do much to make better. So kind of training our brains almost when we're kind of experiencing those difficult thoughts to start to think about, well, what can I control in this moment? What can I do? Because behaviours day to day in the house are something that we can control. And whether that's just doing something else, whether that's moving and just being active, or going out and changing setting and going for a quick walk and having your exercise per day, will be your biggest friend for kind of refocusing from those very difficult worries.
I'm Erroll Murray from Leeds Dads, and you're listening and watching Leeds Dads Ask a Dad Facebook Live. Our focus tonight is on child behaviour. Are you happy with your child's behaviour under coronavirus? How can you help them? With me tonight is Occupational Therapist Ceri Lloyd, who's looking at children's reactions. Sarah's a specialist occupational therapist and play therapist who's worked in child and adolescent mental health for the last 30 years. And psychiatrist Ceri McCann, who's taking questions on how parents are reacting. And Ceri is a cognitive behavioural therapist at Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service. We did have Ron Batiste, but he's dropped off at the moment. This is all the people who are on Netflix at the moment, watching TV and not allowing us to do our Facebook Live. How rude! How rude! With so many questions coming in, and see if we can get them all covered before we have to end. Due to homeschooling, there's been a lot more screen time. We've talked about screen time, haven't we? We can stay on the different themes. Liam says, what are your opinions on timers? Timers until the TV goes off, timers to finish your food, when taking an inappropriate long time to eat, etc. Timers, I've not heard of that before.
I think I would be probably more interested in thinking about maybe a child who's taking much longer to eat than normal. I would be maybe trying to understand what that's about. And I don't know your child, so I don't know whether it is that meal times are the time when everybody's sitting down together and actually there's a sense of security and well-being, so the child wanting to extend that, or whether your child's actually feeling really stressed by everything, and you know how quickly you eat is something you're in control of, so whether they're feeling really very out of control and very scared by everything that's happening. So I guess I tend not to want to go too far, just like, oh, let's manage behaviour. We'd much more wanting to be trying to unpick and understand a bit more about the behaviour, if that makes sense.
Well, it's very difficult for you because obviously you're getting a snapshot of a situation. So, you know, we're grateful that you're able to actually apply your knowledge and experience to the situations. Max says, how do we avoid constant battles over a little bit of bad behaviour? Feels like we're following them around, nagging sometimes.
Fantastic. So what we need to learn to do is to work out, okay, what are we going to give? Our attention is the most powerful thing that you have as parents, that we have. And when children are stressed, they don't really mind whether it's bad attention or good attention they're getting, because it's some sort of attention. So I think it's often helpful for parents to flip things on their head and think about, what behaviour do I want to see more of? And to give loads and loads and loads of attention to that. And then which behaviours actually can I ignore? And so that you decide what behaviour you give attention to. Obviously, you know, if something is awful is about to happen, you have to attend to that. but doing it in as minimal a way as you can, and really trying to think, okay, the top 5 behaviours that my child does that I really want to see more of, how can I grow that? How can I encourage that? Using praise, using rewards, all of those things, and trying to shape things and change things that way, rather than once you start focusing on negative behaviour, then in a way that's all you begin to see. And you can just spiral and sanction yourself out of control, really, until you can almost hear things coming out of your mouth and you're thinking, why have I just said that?
Oh
why
my
have I said,
gosh,
right,
yes.
no television until you're 18, because you know you're not going to stick to it and it's going to be a disaster. So really try. And it's easy to say and it's hard to do, but really try and start noticing when your child's doing well, when your child's doing the things you'd like them to be doing, and really go to town on the praise with that.
I think the idea of being, no TV until you're 18, we've said that so many times in the last 3 weeks. And I know people who've had, whose children have had every device going and every activity going taken away from them because of bad behaviour, and then they've got nothing to do, and they don't enjoy what they're left with. Looking at this, Ceri, looking at this. Overreacting, nagging, are these common traits, or is this expected behaviour? Is it people being hypercritical, or is it just a normal reaction to seeing the same people in the same house all day?
I think, just emphasising that point from Sarah, I feel like I've learnt so much from you tonight. That focus on the positivity is going to be so important right now. I think it's completely normal. I think the more that we judge ourselves during this time, the person that we spend the most time with in this world is always going to be ourselves. And if it was our friend going through that situation and losing it every now and again and overblowing or whatever that looks like with their children, would we be battering them down and saying that's not right, how you're a bad person? No, we wouldn't. We'd be wanting to pick them up and be as motivating as possible. And it is sometimes baffling how we are our biggest criticisms. We criticise ourselves the most out of everyone. And I think practicing that really kind internal voice when we've been through a difficult day or a difficult time is going to be so important right now, because, find me someone who's perfect during this pandemic.
Oh no, it's difficult. It's so difficult. Samin is asking about the top 5 worst things to do when your child is having a meltdown. It's quite a challenging question.
In a way, by the time your child's having a meltdown, you've lost it anyway. So all you have to do during a meltdown is just get through it. It'll finish. And then once it's over, begin to think again. So in a way, don't beat yourself up. Just try not to go over the top. Your child is just gone beyond the point of no return. There's not, the thinking part of their brain is not working at that point. Don't be trying to do your good parenting and reason and why are you behaving like this? What's going on? Can't you listen to me? All of that is like water off a duck's back. We just have to, by the time the child has into that meltdown, it's like the horse is bolted at that stage. We just have to let them come back, reassure them that everything's going to be okay, and let's have a think. And then maybe after a while, a bit of post-match analysis, but don't try and do anything in the heat of the moment. Let it all calm down, and then there's that thing, don't go to sleep bed on an argument. Sometimes I think actually it's quite good to have a bit of calming down time and then think about it again, and then try and understand what was it that had gone so wrong that you lost the plot so spectacularly. What could I do better to support you more? What could you do differently? That you do all of that, but you do all of that when it's not the heat of the moment stuff. Heat of the moment stuff, just survive it. Get through it. It'll end.
We've had a message that I think a lot of parents are going to be thinking about. Palmer has said, how are children going to cope with early morning starts if schools don't reopen until September? No one's getting out of bed. We've had another message from Liam saying, what would you say to teenagers who are questioning the point in bedtime and wake-up time? You have mentioned something about that. There's slightly different perspectives, sort of like looking at timing now and looking at children going to bed and getting up for school once restrictions are changed. But what can parents do? There's a lot of people who are quite concerned out there.
Oh, how are any of us going to manage an early start again? I think that when I'm struggling to be on a Skype meeting by 9 and I'm thinking, normally I'm out of the house by 7:30. How am I going to do this again? I think it's going to be a lot of people a bit late to start with. I think we'll do it. We do it every year after the summer holidays. We do it after the Christmas holidays. We manage it. We do it. And in a way, let's just enjoy it. The fact that at the moment, it's not such a stress to leave the house so early, that we can be in our jammies, that we can do all of those things. I do feel, Ceri, I'd be interested to know what you think. I do really like to have teenagers up during the day. I think there are some good mental health benefits from actually seeing daylight that are really important, but also trying to keep them engaged with the real world. You know, most of us are awake during the day, and if teenagers are up all night and everybody else is up all day, it's very, very quickly they can become more isolated. I don't really like teenagers being isolated. I worry then about their mood going down, about them only having virtual conversations and friendships. You know, trying to keep them up during the day is certainly something. I've got 2 teenagers. We are certainly big on that.
Definitely. And again, it's almost like this loss of structure as well. The kind of loss of getting up routine and going to bed is something as well that can make us feel more out of control. It's something that we can do. And it's coming back down to behaviours almost being a bit like antidepressants at the moment. If we can do more simple things during the day, whether that's just making sure we give more attention to moisturising in the morning, having a really nice effort for like baking or having a nice breakfast. What I would kind of put to a teenager kind of finding difficulty with that right now is maybe just being a bit curious with it. If we're noticing quite a lot of resistance, maybe even being a bit experimental with it and almost coming to an agreement. Why don't the first 3 days of the week we try this kind of earlier start and earlier going to bed, and then maybe the last 3 days of the week you can do whatever you want, and we can just almost see how it impacts their mood during the week, and they can see it for themselves. So almost, because again I can see it from their perspective, there is less reason to get up in the morning, so it is more difficult. So maybe just seeing it that way and being a bit more curious and experimental with them.
Donna is talking about her 14-year-old autistic child who has a very bad attitude at the moment.
I think children who have got neurodevelopmental difficulties, this is even more stressful times. So I would certainly want to point you, there's some really good resources that have been written for children who are on the autistic spectrum that I wonder whether they might be helpful to you, because I think that, you know, there's a normal level of challenge and then there's the additional level of challenge that you're describing, which is absolutely massively more. So I would want to point you to those resources, but I would also want to be thinking with you about how are you looking after yourself? Really, what support are you getting for yourself? What have you got a good enough support package around you? And if not, what could we be doing to try and enhance that? Because it's going to be really challenging and really difficult.
Looking at support, Vivian has said, any advice for single parents about managing conflict with teenagers during lockdown? I think she's talking about getting backup or having other people, or maybe just ways of addressing the teenagers.
Yeah, I think really, really difficult. And I think, again, it's a bit like the kind of the meltdown, isn't it? That by the time, when it's trying to find the exceptions, trying to find the points in the day when you're not arguing, and trying to extend him as much as you can, trying to build that relationship. I mean, there will be, you know, being adversarial is part of being a teenager, thinking your parents are complete idiots and, oh, you must be an alien, you cannot be related to these people. How can you be related to these people who are so feckless and stupid, and that is a normal part of the teenage transition. Otherwise, why would you ever leave home if it was always a great time? So that stage of adolescence, I think some of it's about knowing this is a stage, and actually most of us grow up and turn into reasonable people at the end of it. But also, the MindMate resources, there's some good MindMate resources. There's also some really good, that kind of a way of thinking, non-violent resistance, that has very helpful ways of thinking about when that sort of aggro gets gets too much to manage. I would certainly have a look at some of that NVR, it's called, and there's free seminars and stuff online. Someone called Sarah Fisher is doing a series at the moment with it about NVR. And the Teenage Brain, Understanding Your Teenage Brain, is a brilliant website that has loads, it's packed with great information about supporting teenagers, understanding that stage of development, that I would hope might give some good ideas.
Hopefully you can share some links with us after this is
Of
over
course.
and send some information through. We're pretty much out of time. We're going to whiz through a lot of the questions now, so if we can just get a quick response, that would be really helpful. Kat says, my 3-year-old has been potty trained for a year, but since lockdown has started having accidents, particularly frequent bedwetting. When this happened occasionally in the past, she'd be upset by it, but now doesn't seem bothered. Doesn't even sit up in bed most of the time. Any advice?
Oh, bless her. She just sounds as if it's all so hard. Everything about her life, I bet, has turned upside down and changed. Don't worry about it too much. Just be as loving and caring and consistent, and don't be making a big hullabaloo about it. You'll get it back. You've done it once. You'll be able to do it again. I would just go for trying to reinforce all of the positive behaviour, helping her to feel as safe and secure as she can, and being the best parent that you can be with her. But don't make a fuss about it. Don't make it into a big issue. Doesn't matter. Wash the sheets.
Jay says, I'm doing everything I can to protect my children while being honest with them. I suffer from health anxiety and currently have my own CBT worker, but they still aren't worried or anxious. You say we should worry if they aren't anxious. What do I do? I'm confused. So she's obviously been listening to your advice and you're generating anxiety.
There's a really good systemic thinking, means thinking of the unit as a whole. And it sounds to me as if you're probably carrying enough anxiety for the whole family, which is very kind of you, because it's allowing nobody else to have to worry about it too much. You're shouldering all of the anxiety, and that's why different kids will react in different ways. For some children, this will be the best time of their lives. They hate school. They're not terribly sociable. They'll be thinking they're like living their best life at the moment. And the trick will be trying to get them back into school. So not everybody's the same. Honestly, don't pathologize them not having a problem. That's good.
Ceri, having anxiety, it changes the way you see the whole situation. Do you think it amplifies the isolation?
Definitely. And I think, again, one of the kind of really common symptoms of health anxiety that I know that a lot of us will probably be experiencing is just more attention to body sensations. So if we have a cough, we suddenly start worrying about what that cough means, and then we maybe notice dry throat a bit more. And just really trying to almost catch ourselves if we're noticing that. And again, we're just seeing if those symptoms progress, really. But this is the difficulty with health anxiety. There is such a big crisscross over with anxiety and physical health conditions sometimes. So just trying to not panic and notice if we're focusing on sensations, and again, just catching ourselves and trying to refocus on something else. Very difficult feelings and very difficult time to have health anxiety right now.
Okay, Donna and John have very similar points. One says, our 14-year-old doesn't want to do anything. He just wants to be online 24/7. John says the boys just want Xbox or wrestling TVs. I think they want to stop them from watching TV all the time or screens all the time. What control can adults have over the children in terms of being able to say this isn't healthy for you, when it's difficult to give them an alternative? Ceri.
Well, you are in charge. you extreme measures. Some families turn off the router. disable the Wi-Fi. I think they're absolutely right. I completely support their sentiment that actually children being on Xboxes all the time, doing wrestling games 24/7 is really bad for their mental health. It may be that at the moment it's possible to be on a bit longer than normal, but I would look at, that's not an uncommon difficulty. I would look at the understanding your teenage brain stuff. I'd look at the mind mate stuff. I would look at there's some really good, some of the addiction stuff is quite helpful on that, and trying to think with your children about that. That's a hard one to give a really quick answer to. That's pretty complicated.
Okay, Ceri.
I completely echo what Sarah's saying. It's that conflict of trying to work as a team and do what's best for everyone and being kind, but also kind of that lack of boundaries. And again, it's hard. It's trying to explore it and being supportive and trying to get that sense of working as a team and seeing if there's things that we can do together. Again, kind of having some time by ourselves to self-soothe, whatever that looks like is important, but also time with the family is as well. So just trying to communicate as much as possible. But like Sarah said, there's got to be a point where boundaries come into place. It's very difficult.
Back to potties. My daughter was potty trained now. This is from Matthew. My daughter's was potty trained. Now she's back in pull-ups again. Confused trying to get her on the potty. Any advice?
Just recognizing that actually it's such a hard time, and all of these things, when we talk about regression, this is exactly what we mean, that children have moved from one stage of development to the next, and what happens is they slip back. But it's not a permanent thing. Once life returns to normal, or maybe before that, she'll get back to it. Don't worry too much about it. The thing that will be more unhelpful will be to have loads and loads of focus and attention on things that are not going well like that. I would just really accept that maybe that's how it is just now, and don't get too stressed and wound up by it. She's done it before, she'll do it again. It's unlikely to be a symptom of anything terribly serious, but have confidence in yourself.
We're pretty much out of time. Can I get 3 points from each of you on supporting children and supporting relationships? With yourself, Ceri, looking across a broader sort of situation between, say, siblings or between adults in a household. 3 points that you think would help them to maintain a harmonious home throughout this current situation.
So I guess point one is just remembering right now that behaviour and activities are going to be one of our biggest friends to get through this. It could be useful to have everyone in the house almost starting to schedule at least 2 or 3 behaviours a day to try and just make sure that we're keeping on moving and getting those positive hormones released. The second point, kind of a bit contrary to that, is also just thinking about the standards we're putting on ourselves. I think there's a lot of things out there on social media at the moment promoting that we should be the best that we have ever been during lockdown in a lot of aspects. And like we've discussed with a lot of very difficult situations today, it's not always going to be the case, and almost accepting what is right for us in this moment in kind of that survival mode if that needs be. The third point, which I think is going to be so important for everyone right now, is just trying to be as kind to ourselves and as kind to those around us as possible.
Be kind. I've heard that phrase a lot over the last few weeks. Sarah, your thoughts, please.
My 3 would be, number 1, the airplane principle: take care of yourself. Get the support that you need to be able to take care of yourself so you can take care of your children. The second point would be, let go of some things. This is not model parenting time. This is actually, we just have to get through this. And the third would be, try and think about how can we have fun? How can we actually make some good memories in this time? Let's build boxes, survival boxes for ourselves. Let's put our favourite music in there, our favourite animal. If we were a superhero, what sort of superhero would we be? And build resources for ourselves to get ourselves through it.
What's a survival box?
A survival box is just a way of building really resilience and coping. So doing a bit of front loading, thinking, okay, this is going to be a really difficult time. I'm going to have to put some resources in here for myself. So maybe let me think about what sort of music will be really helpful to me. What's my favorite animal, right? I'm going to have an animal in there that's going to help. Who's my superhero? What superhero is going to help? For children, trying to think of all of those things that are going to shore up their sense of well-being and strength and resilience, and being able to pull on those when they need them. But the whole action of you doing that and making that box together, the practical task of making it builds that emotional strength and resilience too.
There's so many messages, and we still haven't got through all of the questions coming in. I'm really sorry, but we've run out of time. Many thanks to everyone for being part of tonight's broadcast. Our focus was on child behaviour. How do you feel about your child's behaviour and the coronavirus? How can you help? And with me tonight was psychiatrist Ceri McCann, cognitive behavioural therapist at Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service, and occupational therapist Sarah Lloyd, who's also an author. We should make a note of that. I think you've got a book out this week, haven't you?
I did have a book published this week. Yes, thank you.
And you've got the stage for 10 seconds.
Oh,
What's it called?
It's a book for professionals and parents of children who have been looked after. It's about building underdeveloped sensory motor systems in children who experience developmental trauma, all about movement and play. But it's for kids with developmental trauma rather than the typically developing population.
Okay, and
but do buy it anyway.
Well, I'll have a look at it. Sarah's a specialist.
Every home should have one.
Sarah's a specialist occupational therapist and play therapist who's worked in CAMS, the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, for the last 30 years, and still doesn't have a medal or even a mug. I hope the powers that be hear that. Sorry, Ron Baptiste, a member of Leeds Dads, we lost you due to everyone watching. Is it The Crown that everyone's watching at the moment on Netflix? Well, it's probably our iPlayer just catching up on box sets. Knowledge empowers, and even when we find out things about the virus which might be worrying, as we understand more, the less worried we will be. Don't forget, as well as our Ask a Dad Facebook Live, we have the Leeds Dads Virtual Playhouse on Sunday afternoons, the quiz night on WhatsApp, that's Sunday nights at 8, and Leeds Dads Food Parcel Service on Thursday. All the information's here on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Leeds Dads. I'm Erroll Murray, and we hope to be back soon. Thanks very much for being part of this.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.